Welcome to episode 30 of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. Today, we're going to speak about two kings and the contrast between them. So, let's get started. When Shlomo Melech passed away, he was succeeded by his son, Rechavam. Now, Rechavam was not like his father. His father was a prophet, the wisest person that ever lived, the custodian of the Torah. After David was Shlomo, and Rechavam was not in that class, but he was the son of Shlomo, and he became king. There was constantly, in Eretz Yisrael, there was a tension between the other Shvatim and Yehudah. There was always a tension between two of them. Yehudah was descended, Shevet Yehudah was descended from Yehudah, who was given, Yosef Shevet Yehudah, he was given the duty and the privilege of being king. And the northern tribes, the main tribe, the northern tribe was Ephraim. Ephraim was descended from Yosef, and Yosef also had a promise, also had a promise of royalty. So the northern tribes who were descended from Yosef were not comfortable with royal office being in Yehudah, in Yerushalayim. Nevertheless, they accepted it. But when David became king, there were 7 years of strife with the northern kingdom before he was able to establish his kingship over all of Israel in Yerushalayim. In the beginning it was in Hebron, and Yerushalayim was one of Shaul's sons, Ishbosheth, and the northern tribes supported him against Yehudah, but after 7 years of strife, all of Klal Yisrael accepted David that he was the king. But there was always this underlying tension between the south and the north. The south being Yehudah and Binyamin, who was in the same area, and also must be other affinities, and the northern tribes, who are more numerous than the southern tribes. When it came for Rechavam to be king, so they insisted that the coronation take place in Shechem. Shechem was the principal city of Ephraim, and they felt that this would be proper. You're going to be the king, Yehudah will be the king, but the coronation ceremony should take place in Shechem. So they accepted that. They went to Shechem and for the coronation ceremony. But before they started, the people of the leaders, the elders of the north, came to Rechavam and said, look, your father, Shlomo Melech, levied taxes on us, and we want you to lessen the burden of our taxes. It's too much, we want to pay less tax. So Rechavam had two sets of advisors. He had the Zekanim, the elders, they were his advisors, and they told him, you know something, you have to establish your kingdom, you have to get them on your side. So in the beginning, be more subservient. Sure, okay, I'm going to lower the taxes, whatever you want, I'm going to try to accommodate you. And then they'll accept you. And over time, you'll be able to exercise more and more authority over the entire country. This is what they told him. On the other hand, Rechavam's young advisors told him, look, you can't let this get out of hand. They're going to start saying this, they're going to want this, they want that. You have to right away exert your authority. Be strong. Tell them you are the king, they have to listen to you. And Rechavam accepted their advice. And he said, you know something? As much as my father imposed on you his burden, I'm going to be twice as much. You're going to have to accept my authority. I am the king. And didn't sit well with them, and they revolted. And they said, forget it, we want nothing to do with you, and the coronation never took place. Rechavam had to flee for his life. He got back to Yerushalayim, caught his breath, and he was crowned in Yerushalayim, and the kingdom was torn asunder, as Shlomo was told by the Navi, that your kingdom will be torn apart. The south is going to remain in your family. The north will be separate. And Yeravam ben Nevat was the person who was chosen to be the king of the north. Now, he had been told this by the prophet before, that he would become the king, and he did become the king. Now, Yeravam was a very great person. He was, according to the Gemara, according to the Mefarshim, he was the leading sage of the time. His Torah, the Gemara says, Ein by doifi. His Torah was perfect. He was a really great person. He became king of the north. In ancient times, people needed very much to connect to God, and to connect to God in a very tangible way, to do sacrifices, to have rituals by which you connect to God. The Rambam says that the reason why the Torah made korbanos, sacrifices, was because the people were used to it from before. So it doesn't mean that they were trying to give them what they had before. On the contrary, the Rambam explains that the rules of the korbanos were the opposite of the korbanos of the Goyim, but they were used to serving the Rebbeinu Shalom through that ritual. There could have been different rituals. They could have made something else, but that was not familiar. So the Torah took the familiar rituals. You needed, at that time, you needed to connect to God, you needed a ritual. Ideally, the Rambam says, you don't need rituals. Ideally, you should just focus on Yedias Hashem, contemplate God, about the existence of God, think about what He did, think about His Torah, think about His greatness, the phenomenal world that created, the phenomenal Torah that He gave us. Just forget about yourself and just observe and focus. That's what your job is. In the Midbar, they had a Mishkan, and the sacrifices were done in the Mishkan. But when they came, but it was a temporary residence. That's all they had. When they came to cross into Canaan, they didn't have a temple yet. They still had the Mishkan when they were in Gilgal. So when they were in Gilgal, it was permitted for people to make private bamais. People are allowed to build an altar in their backyard and be makriv a carbon on that altar, and this way you are connecting to God. This was allowed. When they came to Shiloh, Shiloh was already a temple, a binyan avonim. It was a stone temple. So over there, it was forbidden to have private bamais. If you wanted to bring a carbon, you had to go to Shiloh. When Shiloh was destroyed by the Plishtim, then the Mishkan was in Noiv, and then in Givon, and it was again the old Mishkan, the little Mishkan. So then, at that time, it was permitted, again, to have bamais in your backyard, wherever you want. When Shlomo Melech built the Beis HaMikdash, no more bamais ktanos. It was forbidden forever. Once it was Yishlaim ein achrei heter, the Gemara says, after Yishlaim was built, you could never, ever again have private altars. It has to be in the Beis HaMikdash. One of the reasons maybe that you can't have a private bama was because when you came to the Beis HaMikdash, you were overawed by the experience. Not only because of the magnificence of the building, but because of the preparations that you had to go through. The Rambam says in the Moira that all the intricate laws of Tumah and Tara you have to go through is a whole mesachtas and mesachtas about what you have to do to become clean, become ritually purified. All of that is for one purpose, that when you come to the Beis Hamikdash, you know that to walk into this place, you couldn't just drop in on the way home from the office. No, it was a process that took days, and then when you finally came in, after all this process, and you walked into the Beis Hamikdash, and you stood there in the presence of God, you were overwhelmed by it, and you really had the Moira Hamikdash. You really had the awe of where you were. If you go into your backyard somewhere, and you make a carbon on a little altar in the backyard, you're not going to have that experience. You only have that experience when you go to the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. And once the Beis Hamikdash was built, then that is the only place that you're allowed to bring a carbon. So now Rechavam was the king of the south, and Yeravam was the king of the north. When we spoke before, when we were talking about Shaul, we pointed out that when Shaul became king, the word that was used for his appointment was Nogid. Nogid means a ruler. When David was anointed, the word that was used was Melech. Melech is sometimes used interchangeably, but at the point of his anointment, the word Melech is an exact word. It's higher than Nogid. Nogid is a ruler. Melech is a leader, an advisor, a moral leader. That's what a Melech is. Yeravam was appointed to be a Nogid. He was not appointed to be a Melech, which seems to indicate that the split of the kingdom was only on the political level. In other words, until now, David and Shlomo were the Melech and the Nogid, because since the period of Judges was not able to establish a society which functioned without a government, and the political leadership of Shaul failed, therefore David and Shlomo also had to be political leaders. So they were both the spiritual leader and also the political leader. Now the political part of it was split. So now Yeravam became the political leader, the Nogid, the political leader of the north. Rechavam was the political leader of the south, but he was also the spiritual leader of all of Eretz Yisrael. However, in the south, his spiritual leadership was underpinned by his political leadership. Since he had power over the country, that's why that gave more force to his spiritual leadership, as we discussed in earlier episodes. However, in the north, he still exerted spiritual leadership. He was Malchus Beis David. He was still the anointed of God, but it was not underpinned by political leadership. Now, therefore, when it came to sitting in the Hazara, in the Beis Hamikdash, the law was that only Malchei Beis David are allowed to sit. Only a Melech who is descended from David is allowed to sit in the Hazara. Everyone else has to stand. Everyone else, because he is the successor to David, who is the spiritual leader of the country. Even though Yeravam was a king, he was a legitimate political king of the northern kingdom, which was prophesied, and there was fulfillment of the prophecy, but he was only a political leader. He did not get to sit in the Hazara, and so therefore Yeravam was presented with a problem. The people needed very much to bring sacrifices. They needed this. It was part of their life. They had, if they had to connect to a deity, they had to. So if they were chas v'sholem, they could either go to Avodah Zarah or they could go to God. And they were servants of God. They wanted to connect to God. And you connect to God by the ritual sacrifices. And that is in the Beis Hamikdash. So they would have to go to Yerushalayim to bring their korbanos. They would have to cross the border from the northern kingdom into the southern kingdom. I don't know if you needed a visa or not, but they crossed the border, And then they would go to the Beis Hamikdash. They probably welcomed all these pilgrims because they brought a lot of money with them, and they could come to Yerushalayim, and they would bring the korbanos. However, when they came there, and they were studying the Azorah, they would see that the king of Yehudah is sitting, and the king of Ephraim and the northern kingdom is standing, and that would make them undermine the authority of Yeravam. He felt that he would be disrespected. And therefore, he would undermine his authority, and the whole northern kingdom would disintegrate because they're all going to have to run to Yerushalayim anyway. And therefore, he's not going to have two kingdoms. So what did he do? He made the border between the north and the south, guards and soldiers. He did not allow anybody to go to Yerushalayim. You can't go. You can't go. But we need to bring korbanos. We need to do this. So he he set up a golden calf in two places, Bethel and in Dan. He said this golden calf, which he said, this is a symbol of your God. Elu Elehecha Yisrael. This is the symbol of your God. Just like in the Midbar, Aaron said, Elu Elehecha Yisrael. Of course, he was trying to stall Moshe, but he told them something that they heard. They needed some kind of a tangible symbol of God. So till then, Moshe was the symbol of God. Now they needed something else. Moshe is gone. They thought he died, so he gave them a golden calf. So he did the same thing here. He gave them these two golden calves. These are the symbol of God. They did not bring korbanos to the golden calf, but these were set up in two places. This means God is in your presence. And now you can all go and bring korbanos on your own private altars. And you could do it, and we had the Kohanim, maybe you had some Kohanim that were not from Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi would not participate in this. So he made new Kohanim, and everybody went to the Bamas, and he gave people an outlet that if they needed to bring korbanos, it was not necessary to go to Yerushalayim. You can go here and do everything that you want. It's mind-boggling how a person like Yeravam would do this. It's mind-boggling. If he was the biggest Torah sage of his time, and this is forbidden in the Torah. So how could you do such a thing? Shchutei chutz, you're not allowed to bring a korban anywhere except for in the Beis Hamikdash. How could he do this? But maybe he thought that since it was prophecy that there would be two kingdoms, and if they would go to Yerushalayim, the northern kingdom would not be able to survive. Therefore, he had to do something to give them another outlet, and maybe this was allowed. I don't know. It's difficult to understand this. It's amazing. And you see also Yeravam was, even though he was such a big Torah sage, there were seeds of something else in him. Because when he complained to Shlomo after he built all these palaces for his pagan wives, his formerly pagan wives, and we spoke last time about that people knew about it, but they didn't complain to Shlomo. And he went to complain to Shlomo. What did he complain? That by building all these palaces, you're clogging up traffic that has to go to the Beis Hamikdash. Why didn't he complain to him about what was going on in those palaces? So something already iffy about this Yeravam. But this is what he did. It was completely damaging to Klal Yisrael, because eventually not only to the northern kingdom, we just corrupted the whole service, and they let them do sacrifices on private altars, which was absolutely forbidden. But the south also eventually started putting up private altars, like so did in the north. It wasn't so easy to go to Yerushalayim. It wasn't around the corner, even in Yehudah, and you had to go through a whole process to come in there to purify yourself. So it was very attractive to have private altars. And you'll see throughout the next few hundred years of history, that the kings always struggled with eliminating the altars. And even the good ones who were able to, to lift up the spiritual level of Klal Yisrael, but this was too far. They could not get the people to give up their bamais, to give them up. This we will see as we go on. So Yeravam is an enigma, and the Gemara says that he does not have a share in the Olam Haba, doesn't have a share in the next world, and he went from being like the top to being the worst. So this was Yeravam. Now the other king. Let's talk about Rechavam. So Rechavam, through his rashness and his accepting the advice of the youth instead of the advice of the elders, so he lost the northern kingdom, and his kingdom was limited to the south. So what was Rechavam? Now in the beginning, it seemed that there would be a war with Yeravam. And there was a war after Rechavam. After he died, he was succeeded by his son Aviyam, and Aviyam and Yeravam did have a war. They did have a war. Who's going to take over the other one? They did have a war. Rechavam did not have a war with Yeravam. However, he spent 3 years fortifying Yehudah against a possible invasion from the north, and he built forts. He fortified the country. Now there is a question: what was Rechavam good or was he not? So some commentators say that in the Tanakh, his mother's name is mentioned twice. B'Shem Imay, the name of his mother is Naama HaAmoines. Naama from Ammon. She was an Ammonite princess. So some commentators say that because she's mentioned twice, that means that she had a strong influence on him. And it says in Sefer Ezra that after Rechavam finished fortifying the south against an invasion from the north, Ozav es Hashem v'chol Yisrael imay. He abandoned God, and the rest of Israel went along with him to abandon God. What does that mean? So some commentators say it means that he turned to Avodah Zarah, that Naama Amoines did Avodah Zarah, and she taught him to do Avodah Zarah, and that's why her name is mentioned twice. But this is really very problematic. First of all, the Gemara says in Bava Kama, Lamed Zayin, the Gemara says that Moshe wanted to go to war with Moav because he made a Kal V'chomer. He said, "You told me to go." Midian came to help Moav against Klal Yisrael. And God told him, "Attack Tzreis and Midyanim. Go attack Midian." So if you have to attack Midian, who was only accomplice, certainly we should attack Moav, who was the main perpetrator. So God told him, no, I have a different way of looking at it. Shnei Preidas Toivas Yeshli. You have two good pigeons, or Preida, I don't know if Preida is exact, birds. I have two good birds. And one of them is Rus Amoyaviyah, who was the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, and the other one is Naama HaAmoines. So, and because of these two, you may not attack Ammon and Moav. So it would seem that she was a tzaddikus, that she was not a bad person, because how would her schos protect Ammon? And the Nemuki Yosef over there in Bava Kama says that she would, even though it says that his Ammonite wives did Avodah Zarah, Naama did not. She did not. She was a tzaddikus. The Medrash says in Shir HaShirim that new saplings were seen in the field, and it's a time to sing. What does this mean? So the Medrash says this is David, Shloima, Rechavam, Aviyam, and Asa. The first 5 kings of Yehudah, these are the beautiful saplings that appeared in the field, and now it's time to rejoice, because these are the ones that established the dynasty of the house of David. So obviously Rechavam was not a Rasha. Furthermore, it says, Aviyam, the pasuk says, again, you have to know how to read Tanakh. Aviyam, the pasuk says, what he did, kol chatos hasha asa aviv. He did everything that Rechavam did, Aviyam did. So A equals B. So Aviyam and Rechavam are the same. And the pasuk says on Aviyam, Lo'hoya shala levavai shalom im Hashem Elokov k'levav David Avdai. He was not as loyal to God as his great-grandfather David was loyal to God. And from this, the Gemara learns out that Shlomo never did a sin, because the Gemara says he was just not as loyal as David, but he didn't do any sins. So Aviyam obviously didn't do any sins. So if Aviyam didn't do any sins, then Rechavam didn't do any sins, because they were both equal. So what does this mean that he abandoned God? And what does this mean that he did all the sins of his father? What does this mean? So I think Pshat is like this. Shlomo married all these pagan princesses, and he converted them, and he ensconced them in their palaces, and then he didn't do continuing education, he didn't pay attention to them, and as a result of that, there was a lot of pagan worship in the palaces, and because of that, he lost, that the kingdom was split. That was because of that. Nama was a big tzaddikus. Nama said, I am a Jewish convert, I'm loyal to my husband, I'm loyal to God, and even though she lived in these palaces with all these others doing Avodah Zarah, she protected Rechavam, and she did not allow him to do Avodah Zarah like the others were doing. She didn't let him. However, she was not capable of giving Rechavam more. She was being trained by Rechavam was being trained by his mother. She was taking care of him. She could only give him what she had. In Judaism, there is the concept of dveikus, that a person is constantly Shivisi Hashem Nagdi Summit. A person is constantly supposed to be thinking about God. We spoke about this in the other times. The Rambam says a person, everything that he's doing should all be about Yedias Hashem, knowing God. Everything should be about knowing God. Everything that you do, everything that you think, everything, it's all about Yedias Hashem. That's called Dveikus. It means attachment. A person should constantly be attached to God. In the pagan cults, there was no such thing. In pagan cults, you were devoted to your God. You came there, you brought him sacrifices, you brought him gifts, whatever you did, and then you went home and you had your life. Maybe you had your little gods in your house to protect you from mice or whatever, but you didn't have this concept of dveikus. So Nama was not able to impart to Rechavam the idea of dveikus. So as long as this is what it says in Ezra, the 3 years that Rechavam spent protecting the south from the north, he was constantly thinking about God, about the Beis Hamikdash, about protecting the Avodah, about keeping the northern barbarians out of here, protecting the religion. He was absorbed with it all the time. That's what he lived for 3 years. No, come on, did you build a fort here? Did you build a fort there? We have to protect the Beis Hamikdash. So this was constant. He was artificially in the Dveikus. But once he finished fortifying the south, Ozav es Hashem, from that point on, he did not have a high level of Dveikus. He was just a regular person. I go to shul, I learn, I put on my tefillin, I do my mitzvahs. But the idea that you have to be constantly consumed with knowledge of God, he was not trained to that. He didn't know about that. So therefore, for 3 years, he was very much in Dveikus. After 3 years, he abandoned God. Doesn't mean that he didn't learn, doesn't mean he didn't daven, doesn't mean he didn't do mitzvahs, but then he had a little time for himself. He had his own life. And Kol Yisrael Imoi. And the rest of Klal Yisrael also was lowered the level of Dveikus. because they followed the example of the king. And that's what the pasuk says, that Aviyam did kol chatzah she'asa aviv. That means Aviyah also did not have the level of dveikas that Shlomo and David had. He was like the level of dveikas of Rechavam, but of course he did not sin. So here we have these two kings. Yeravam was coming from a high point where he was a tremendous Torah sage, tremendous Talmud Chacham, and he corrupted himself by his greed and by his ambition. He could not tolerate standing in the Azorah when Rechavam was sitting. And Rechavam, on the other hand, was not that great, but he was a son of Shlomo and a grandson of David, and he carried the weight of his ancestors on his shoulders, and he rose to the occasion, and he was good, and he was solid, and he was loyal, and whatever his shortcomings were, but he was a good king. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time. I'd like to invite you to visit me at RabbiReinman.com and explore all my works, both completed and still in progress, and kindly take the opportunity to lend your support on the participant page. Thank you very much, and be well.